All right, good morning, everyone. It's a Tuesday, so we're going to start up our Tech Tip Tuesdays. Today, we're going to be looking at Weldments and utilizing some of the features on that and some basic structure on how to develop your sketches on Weldments. If you're not familiar with Weldments, what Weldments are, it's a set of features within SolidWorks that acts kind of like a sweep. It's a very powerful tool. It's utilized within part files, and what happens is that you create multiple bodies. And what SolidWorks actually does here is it creates what's known as a cut list for you. And in this tech tip, I just really wanted to show you guys some of the basics of generating your sketches, so that way your profiles can follow along those sketch lines or edges in some instances. And so I wanted to give you guys some opportunity here and seeing how I generally go about it. This is Peter Estes, the owner of Valley CAD, and as things pop up, feel free to shoot us a message or an email. You could email me directly, peter.estes@valleycad.com. You could hop onto our website, valleycad.com as well. You could also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and here on Twitch as well. So without much further ado, here we go. Let's look at our little assembly, or our weldment assembly that I got here for you guys. So looking here on SolidWorks, I got this simple table, and this is what we will actually be making through this little tech tip tutorial. And like I stated, we're just going to go into the fundamentals of starting your part file and some techniques that you can use for it. As you can see on my design tree here, I utilize planes to make all of my weldment profiles, or my weldment structure, I should say. And some people or designers like to use 3D sketches. I use them in some applications, but I just find myself being able to do it all utilizing planes. And I typically find it easier to control in the long run. And so here's how I go about it. And so I'll start this part brand new for you guys. So I'll simply come up here, clicking on a new part file. So whenever you start with your blank canvas, I always have a rule of thumb of trying to keep your origin in the dead center of your part. And that's just a rule that I have for whenever I start a base part file. This just helps along the line when you make assemblies and so forth, to make it so that everything else aligns with the origin. And so when creating sketches for your weldment structure, sometimes it's hard to try to keep your origin dead center on it. Now, there are applications, don't get me wrong, where the origin does need to be off to the side, but honestly, with my experience, I've seen probably about 95% of my part files, I always try to keep the origin in the dead center of the part. And so looking here on my screen now, you can see that the origin is sitting there in the dead center. And if you're not familiar with the origin, that is where your front, top, and right planes all meet. And so I'll go ahead and show each one of these just so you guys can see it really quick. And also, I will turn on my origin. So that little blue dot there in the dead center, that is home. That is where everything comes and meets together. And so that's based off your front, top, and right planes. So to try to keep that in the dead center of our part, this is what I generally like to do. As I stated earlier, I like to make new reference planes that are going to keep the origin centered. And I use these reference planes to sketch on. And so as we saw in that example of the part here, I just did a Control-Tab to switch back to the other part file. This is what we will end up making. It's just a simple table, nothing fancy about it. I'm going to be utilizing material of pine for it. You could use whatever material you want. It's just keeping it, making it look like it's a wood table. So going back to this new part file, what I like to do is actually create new reference planes off of my primary planes. And so I'll utilize my right plane first. So when making new reference planes, what a lot of people will do is they will look at the feature command ribbon up here and they will say, oh, Here's my reference geometry. This is where I can make a new plane. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's totally the right way of doing it. But if sometimes you're just like, all right, I know what plane I want, and I just want to make it quickly. I don't want to have to be moving my cursor around over and over again. So here's actually a shortcut way if you're not familiar with this yet. We're on SOLIDWORKS 2018. And with SOLIDWORKS 2018, I noticed that they changed some of the icons on here. If you're on an older version of SOLIDWORKS, such as 2016 or 17 or even older than that, when you hover over a plane, you will actually see what looks like a crosshair that will show up. In 2018, all that you will see is this little blue square next to your cursor. And this is your feedback mechanism that SOLIDWORKS uses. And so this little blue square is indicating, hey, you are hovering over a plane, and if you click on it right now, you are going to be selecting that plane. And so whenever you see this show up here, here's my shortcut way of making a quick offset plane within my part file. What I like to do is hold down Control and then click and drag. That was the quick way. Instead of coming up here to my features, coming over, clicking reference geometry, clicking on the down arrow, clicking reference plane. The quick way to do it is to simply hold down Control, click, and drag. Okay, so on this one, I'm going to say this is coming out, let's say 20 inches. And click the green check mark on there. I want to do this again, and I'll just call this it's always good to name your features in your design tree. It just makes it easier to organize. So we're going to say that this is right, P-R-I-M. And I'm just going to call it prim for primary. You could finish it off if you like, but do as you see. And then from there, I'm going to do the same steps again, but this time what I'm going to do is hold down Control, click and drag off of my right primary plane. And you'll see why I'm calling this primary. So once again, holding down Control, click, and drag. This time, because I want to keep my origin in the dead center, well, I went off 20 to the right, so this time I'm going to say let's go off 40. So on this one, we'll just call this left driven. Okay. So right primary and left driven. Okay, so I'll show you a little bit more of why I'm calling it these items. Now, the other aspect that I'm going to do is do the exact same process for my front plane. So same steps, hold down Control, click and drag. And this time I'll say that this is coming off, let's say 12 inches, and say OK. And we'll call this front primary. And then I'll do the back one. And I'll just say Control, click and drag. And we'll call this 24 because I want my origin to be in the dead center. All my primary planes are in the dead center as well. So 24. And we'll call this out to being back driven. Just like that. So if you're not familiar with renaming features in your design tree, you just slow click on it twice. You can also select it and push F2, your function 2 button on your keyboard. That is a Microsoft way of going into rename mode. Okay. So now that I got all these planes going, going back and looking at my naming convention here, I said right primary, left driven, front primary, and back driven. Well, if I was to come in here and say that my right plane, I want this to come off at, let's say, 24 inches. And I do a Control Q on that. Did you notice here that my left plane shifted with it? It did not stay in its location. The reason why is because this plane is being driven 40 inches off of my right plane, no matter what. And so I want to keep the same function that my origin is in the dead center. I can't stress that enough on this. I've been repeating it over and over again. So I'm going to do a quick Control Z, do it twice there, so that way everything's going back to the same. This time what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the left driven plane and I'm going to add an equation to this. So if you're not familiar with equations, it's a phenomenal tool that SOLIDWORKS uses to make your parts smarter. And I generally use equations probably on 85 to 90% of my parts. And also I do it in assemblies as well. So when I double click on this, you'll see that it says called my modify box, and this is going off at 40 inches. Well, that's great, but if I ever change my right primary plane to, let's say, 20, then I have to remember to go back and change my left driven plane. I have a philosophy that the more clicks you have to do, the more likely you're going to forget one. And so I always try to make my part files and assembly files to have as few clicks as needed. And so on this application, what I want to do is, instead of saying that's 40, I'm going to start off by starting off with the equal symbol there. Whenever you do this in your modify box, SOLIDWORKS automatically goes into equation mode for you. It's a great function that comes out. Actually, one of my former colleagues and good friend, he's actually the one that sent in the enhancement request to SOLIDWORKS saying, hey, can you please add the equation function in the modify box? And lo and behold, SOLIDWORKS does listen to you guys. So if you are seeing functions within SOLIDWORKS and go, man, I wish it did this, contact your VAR or hop onto your customer portal and create enhancement requests. SOLIDWORKS does listen to them, and they go through and read them. I've seen multiple applications where they do implement it. It might not be on that exact release, but it might be a year later or 2 years later. They do listen to the customers. So with that equal sign activated, I'm going to come into my graphics area, and notice I just clicked in my graphics area. SOLIDWORKS still keeps my modify box open for me. Super useful, and here's the reason why. When I click on my right plane, you'll notice that my 20 inches is visible. Look what happens when I click on that 20. SOLIDWORKS comes in and says, hey, I'm going to put in the name of that dimension, which is called D1 at right primary, and say that this item is always equal to this. Well, if I say that that's equal to it, well, then left driven is always going to land on top of my right plane, the primary right plane, not that one in the center. So I always want this to be double of that. So creating an equation, I'm going to say times 2. So this is saying, all right, take whatever that dimension is and multiply it by 2 to get my left driven side. So simply click the green check mark, do a Control Q. You'll see here when I click on this, SOLIDWORKS now added this little E symbol onto my 40. What that little E symbol is actually an epsilon symbol. And it's SOLIDWORKS' way of flagging the dimension, saying this dimension is driven off of something else. And so that's why I went into my naming convention saying that this is left driven. It's saying that this is being driven off of another set of dimensions. It's just something for me to visually see it. I'm going to do the exact same thing for my front and back planes. So my back driven needs to get the equation applied to it. So I want to make this equal to my front primary times 2. Do a Control Q on that. So let's just test our equations here, see if they worked. So if I see that 20, and let's say I bump that up to 30. Do a Control Q. All right, it looks like it worked. It looked like my left plane bounced out to the left another 60 inches. Okay, let's make sure that my front and back planes work the same way. So we said this was 12. Let's bump this up to, let's say, 20. And it looked like it updated it right away. Awesome. So now we got our plane set up. Now it's time to go in and start sketching. The reason why I also create my planes, you'll see here in a couple clicks, is I use them to fully define my sketches. Now, there's one other plane that I also want to add on this, and it's going to be my top. I'm going to create it based off of that and hold down Control and drag it up. This is going to be our top of the table for saying this is the height of it. So I'm going to say that this is going to come off at 27 inches. That's generally the height of a table. And so we can simply come into this and say this is called table top. Okay, So now we got our planes set up. As I was saying a couple moments ago, I use these planes to fully define my sketches. So I'm going to start off by coming onto my right primary and create a new sketch on there. With this, I'm going to simply come in, draw a line, come up, come over, and come back down. Look what happens here. Because I have these planes visible for me, SOLIDWORKS is actually going to allow me to come in, click on this line, hold down Control, click on that plane. I could tell them, make them collinear. And also I'm going to do that for my top line, going up to my tabletop plane. Make them collinear. Now we can look at my sketch here and see that, you know what, it's almost fully defined. Not totally yet because the bottom aspect is not defined yet. Well, I want to make these two lines horizontal, and I want to make them so that they are either coincident to the top plane or say make them horizontal to my origin. Either one works for this application. So as we look at this, my whole sketch is fully defined, not by dimensions, but by relations. They are being driven by my planes. And so when we start making our bodies on this, you'll see some pretty cool functions that will come from it. So now with that done, I'm going to say OK to this. Fully defined sketch. And you'll see here that SOLIDWORKS likes to come in and resize all the planes to match what you have there. Just for visual representation, I'm going to turn off the 3 primary planes. All right, so now that we come into this, I'm going to say that this is right primary sketch. And I want to make this exact same sketch profile show up on my left driven plane. How I will actually go about this is the same concept of saying let's make a new sketch, but I don't want to have to come in and draw every single line. Well, not every, but 3 lines. It took me probably 5 to 20 seconds to be able to do all that. So I'd rather do this in a quicker fashion. SOLIDWORKS has a great function where if I select my existing plane here, at the very top under your sketch command ribbon, there's this thing called convert entities. Convert entities, as it says there, converts selected model, edges, or sketch entities into sketch segments. So let's see what that does for me. If I click on that, you'll see that SOLIDWORKS automatically takes my existing sketch, because I selected right primary sketch as a whole, and it will take every single sketch line and convert it to my left driven plane for me. It's almost like it's like a shadow effect. So if I shined a light on my right plane here, it shoots it onto the left driven, and it's on a 1-to-1 scale factor and everything on there. Really a nice function. Okay, so now that we have that set up, I'm going to just say OK to this and get out of this sketch. So with this, I'm using my front and back driven planes to drive these 2 sets of sketches. Technically, it's driving my right primary sketch. Sketch 2 is driven off of my right primary sketch. So I'm going to call this LFT for left driven sketch. Okay, and I could sketch on my front and back planes if I want to, but I'm actually going to just sketch on my top plane here because I got my legs drawn out. But now what I need to do is draw the line that's going to come across and connect these 2 points. Okay, so I could simply do this by drawing on my tabletop plane, or I could come in and create a 3D sketch. Either way works on this one. Because I'm doing this tech tip stating that I'm using planes for everything, I'm going to stick with the plane function for this. So selecting my tabletop, I'm going to go ahead and create a new sketch. And on this, I'm just simply going to draw 2 individual lines. So I'm clicking here, coming over, and what I want to do is actually connect to that point and come over and connect to this point. That line is now fully defined. And I'm going to do that same process right here. Come in, click, and then terminate it on this other end. All right, so now with this done, if I just go ahead and exit the sketch, And I'm just going to come up to my Indiana Jones eyeball, and let's turn off all planes. So here is the structure of my table. This is the beginning process of it for all my legs. So I'll switch back to the part that I already made, and you'll see here that this structure here, and we could look at the same set of sketches that I have already made that were used for this, and you'll see that, oh, okay, this set of legs is following that sketch profile. And then this set of legs is following its back sketch profile, and then I got a 2x4 that's coming across this front end here. All right, so now let's go ahead and go back to my new sketch file that I'm making, and let's apply our weldment profiles. So when you activate Weldments, I believe when you first install SOLIDWORKS, it's visible. If you don't see a Weldments tab across the top of your screen, don't worry. You just need to turn it on. And by doing that, you can simply right-click on your features or whatever tabs you do see up here. When you right-click, you'll see this drop-down menu. These are all the different command tabs that you can turn on for your command ribbon up top. So if I don't want to see, let's say, Weldments, I could click on that, and you'll see that it's not there anymore. So if you need to turn it on so it's visible, you simply right-click on any of the existing tabs, and you then click on the tab that you want to add. So there's my Weldments right there. Okay. So with Weldments here, you'll see that the set of features that I have are 3D sketch, weldment, structural member, and extruded boss base, and also reference plane. Well, I don't need to make a 3D sketch because I have all my sketches already made for me. So this time what I'm going to do is select structural member. So as it states there, it says creates a structural member feature by sweeping predefined profiles along user-defined paths. So these predefined profiles, I'll save that for another tech tip video because that could take us another hour to do. What these predefined profiles are actually sketches that were made in other part files, and they are saved as library feature parts. SOLIDWORKS will come in and it'll already have an ISO and an ANSI set of standard profiles for you. You'll notice here that I have several more than just that though. I have an 80/20 extrusions, unistrut, and wood. These three items that I have are actually custom profiles that I made. These are for items that I see myself using on a day-to-day basis for clients or doing projects for keeping my honing in my skills ultimately. So with the ANSI inch one, you actually have to download this. If you don't download it, you will only have a couple different profiles. So if I select ISO here, you'll basically have that amount of profiles that you can pick from. When you download the ANSI inch, you have quite a few more options to pick from depending on what you need. So when I'm saying these terms download, it's not hard to do. What you will actually do is come over here to the right side of your screen of SOLIDWORKS. This is called your task pane. And over here on your task pane, you'll see you got your SOLIDWORKS resources, design library, file explorer, view palette. This is utilized when you are in a drawing mode. Appearance scenes and decals, custom properties, and SOLIDWORKS forum. What we are interested in looking at is actually under our design library. And under our design library, this is where if you have SOLIDWORKS Professional or Premium, you'll have Toolbox here, as well where you can also go to 3D Content Central. Highly recommend that you guys get familiar with 3D Content Central. But as you look a little bit further down, there's this thing called SOLIDWORKS Content. SOLIDWORKS Content is something that gets installed with SOLIDWORKS, and it's a housing mechanism that holds all these different zip files. As you found out when you installed SOLIDWORKS, SOLIDWORKS is roughly 12.6 gigabytes now, I think, on an install. And so SOLIDWORKS, what they do is they actually, under their content, have these predefined folders and also zip files. You'll see here under my Weldments folder that there are these little icons here. Each of these are actually zip files that house different weldment profiles. And so as you see here, as I'm hovering over it, the little tech tip that comes up says, hey, if you want to use this, you need to hold down Control, click, and control click, and you'll download the zip file. Once that is done, you'll then tell SOLIDWORKS to look to this location, and from there on out, whenever you select structural member, you will see that zipped folder that's downloaded. And now you got a plethora of different profiles to pick from. So for me, on this application, I'm going to do the wood one. These are custom profiles that I made, and I based it off of lumber that you can purchase at Lowe's or Home Depot or whatever lumber store you go to. I specified a 1x configured, a 2x, and a 4x. I just call them these, and so if I say, hey, I want to have a 2x, but I want to have what's known as a 2x4. That's what it's called, but I actually have the shape of it, or the true dimensions on it, to what an actual 2x4 is. It's a 1.5 by 3.5, give or take. And so with this 2x4 selected, I get to go through and specify my groups or different sketch entities and select them, and SOLIDWORKS is going to apply that profile, and it's going to tell it to follow along that sketch line. So simply with my groups, I'm going to go click here, and I'll click here, and I'll click here. Hey, not too bad, huh? So SOLIDWORKS came in, and it said, all right, you want to have a 2x4, we're going to tell it to come along this line, travel up this line, come across laterally, and then go back down. And so with this, you say, all right, that does not seem too hard. Now, I want to do this again over here. Oh, but it looks like it's not working properly. Why isn't SOLIDWORKS letting me do this? Well, what's happening here is SOLIDWORKS is saying, you know what, these are a whole different set of lines, and they do not contact the set of lines that you already have. And they're perpendicular to it. Like they're not connecting, so it can't be considered a group. Not to fret on this. If you look at your selection box here, it says groups and is calling this group 1. I can come in and specify a new group. When I specify new group, my group 1 gets grayed out, and it allows me to come in and specify on my next set of lines. Just like that. Now, looking at my two sets of groups here, you'll notice that this set of groups is on the inside of my, I believe that's my left driven plane. Yeah, it's on the inside of my left driven plane. And these set of groups, or this group, is set to the outside of my right primary plane. So looking at this, I wish that this would come in on the inside. And I also notice here that on the top, it's above my tabletop plane, or line I should say. So I need to adjust this in some way, where I need to make it to where that these guys are on the inside all around. So looking at this, maybe I need to come in and I need to locate my profile. So under your properties here, under structural member, I'm just scrolling up and down here. As I scroll down, at the very bottom, there's this thing called locate profile. So when I click this, SOLIDWORKS is going to zoom in to the very first sketch entity that I had, and you'll see here that there's a sketch here. This is the profile that gets applied to this part, and that's where SOLIDWORKS is looking, saying, hey, you need this profile. Hey, well, Peter looks like he made a custom set of profiles, and he calls it 2x4. This is what the sketch that he used to make it. Remember, think of sweeps. It's a profile and a path. So in this application, I want to make it to where this profile is coming in on the inside of this line. So when I made my profile, I actually had different landing points. So in this application, I think I want to click on this point here. See how it shifted everything to the inside? And also, what it did here, we'll switch to a front view, it made it to where my top cross 2x4 is also on the inside. Oh, this looks like group 1 is still on the outside though. So what I need to do is actually come back and click on group 1. You'll see here that SOLIDWORKS switched to this being yellow, and group 2 is now grayed out. This allows me and tells me that, hey, your group 1 is selected. So if you make any changes here, it's going to affect group 1. It is not going to affect group 2. So the same thing that I did with group 2 though, I said locate profile. I need to do that again here because I want to make my 2x4 that's going across the top to be on the inside. So simply clicking locate profile. SOLIDWORKS is going to come in here. Now I'm happy with my shape being on the inside of my sketch of my left plane, but I want it to be on the inside of my top. So just doing a little testing here. Let's click on this point here instead. That looks like it did fix my scenario here. Sweet. So now the next thing that I'm going to do is click on new group again, and I want to specify a new group that's going to come across the top here. So if I click on here and here as well, okay, looks like I got an issue here where they're all going to the right side in this view of my lines. But I don't want this to be coming out to the right side here because nothing's going to support it. This one is okay, but I also don't like it being up high. Maybe if I relocate the profile, we'll be okay. So when I specify locate profile, I want it to be below. Okay, so if I click here, all right, brought it down so it's below. That's good. And let's see here. Something's not right with this far right one still. Okay, here's the other reason why you have groups. I am seeing here that with this group, I'm telling every shape to be to the right side inside of my top lines. So in this application, I need to come back actually into my settings, and I need to deselect this line here. Okay, so that allowed for just this group to be visible. Now I need to click on new group again, and I need to click on this line. In the same aspect, I'm just going to come in and say, let's locate profile. And I'm going to click on this top right corner. That's going to force this shape to come on the inside and below my tabletop plane. So what's really cool about doing everything under the same feature of structural member, SOLIDWORKS will come in and will automatically cut off shapes or extrusions or potential extrusions to interfere with each other. So this is a really nice function that SOLIDWORKS does that. It's a smart software, so let it be smart. But you will notice here that I got these little magenta pink dots they can click on. Let's see what happens when I click on this dot here. What this is called is your corner treatment dots. Okay, that's a scientific word or stain. No, it's not. But if we look at this, we see group 1, trim order 1, and it says group 2, trim order 2. Well, it's saying here that group 1 is going to be my primary trim, and group 2 is going to be secondary. Well, let's look at this. So if I change group trim 1, and I change that to a 2, look what happens here. SOLIDWORKS will allow to have some very funky looking cuts here. Now, if you send that off to a saw guy and say, hey, can you cut these angles for me? They will say, sure, it'll be exponential amount of money, but if you want to go that route, we can. It's not really the best route to go, though, because if we look at this angle here, SOLIDWORKS is doing something a little funky there. Maybe if I click on group 2 here and I say make that 1, you'll see here that SOLIDWORKS came back and it said, okay, this corner between this member and this member are going to be cut down, so that way this long cross beam can go all the way across. Now, looking at your design, you can do that if you like. In this application, I'm going to keep the miter joints for group 1 and make that the primary. And so that way it's just staying uniform all the way around. Okay, I highly recommend, have fun with it. But also looking at our group corner treatment, we can also say let's do an in butt. So looking at this corner, I'm in butting this one to come in here, and this group, I believe that was group 3, is coming in and is butting up against this vertical member. So you can have fun with it in any way that you'd see fit on there. Okay, so for this application, I'm still going to keep the miter effect, just I like how it looks. All right, so now that I got all my structures set up, I'm going to simply click the green check mark. And there we go. There is my table legs and framework for my whole table. So looking at this, it was a very simple project to do. Now, looking back on my planes, because that's really what this tech tip was about, and a process of making this, is coming in and using planes to drive how I want my table to function. So if I click on my right plane, the right primary that I made, and I change this to, let's say, 60, do Control Q, you'll see here that everything updated with that plane. Now, let's say it's 60 inches long, or 120 overall, and it's roughly 40 inches wide. I'll show the back driven so we can see that dimension. Okay, so maybe instead of 40 inches, I'd rather have this be a total of 60 inches across. Okay, so with that, I'm going to click on my front plane, and I'm going to bump that 20 to 30. Control Q. Now we got a pretty large tabletop here. Now, as we look at this, we can say, all right, we need to start adding some more structural members on here. And that's a very simple process to do. What I would actually do is come up here and specify my tabletop plane. Create a new sketch, and I would utilize this to draw some new lines. So I'll say that there's a cross member here, and then there's also going to be one here. Okay, but maybe I also need to have a set that's going to come across here as well. So what I like to do here is actually draw in a construction line that will come across, and then draw a normal line that will go from there to there. What that's doing is it's centering this line between this edge to this edge. So that's a process that I like to go about on here if you need to make structural cross members. And so saying okay to this, simply coming back in and saying, all right, let's go to my Weldments, and let's do another set of structural members. And we'll say the 2x4 function again. Groups, I'm going to say this line, and that line. Oh, it won't let me do it because this line is coming across perpendicular from this group. And also this group here, I'm okay with it, but maybe I'd rather have it to where these guys are centered on here, and especially on the top, because I want to make it so that these members are flush with my primary framework. So I'll simply come in, say locate profile, and click in this top dead center. So that is centering each structural member to be centered on these lines. So come in here and say new group, click on this long lateral one, and in this application I want to locate profile and say let's make it dead center as well here. So with our corner treatment setup, you will see that SOLIDWORKS actually came in and it split this long running beam and made it to where these cross beams were the primary and these were the secondary. So that's not bad. We can say okay to that. And so as we look at this, say, all right, that's looking pretty good. Now, once again, I'm just showing you guys techniques of utilizing planes on here. Just wanted to show you how I use them to make my weldments. And so if I came in here and said, all right, I don't need this to be 120 inches overall anymore, let's bump it down so it's at 100. Because I did that construction line coming across here and I said make that always centered, and this line is always coming off center from this point to here, this is always going to update, so it's going to bisect from between this face and this line. Okay, always will do that for me. Now looking at this weldment or these beams here, you'll see that this is extending down a little bit. So there's some functions that I might have to do here where I need to come back to configure 2-4, that first one that I did, and create a new set of groups and rotate this profile 90 degrees, or I can relocate this profile at 90 degrees. And what I mean by this is simply coming in, and let's say group number 2, I want to come in and say, let's locate this profile, and I want to make it so that it's locked to this point. Now, looking at this point here, you go, okay, hang on, Peter, this is now offset to the right of that sketch line, and it's up high. Well, on top of saying locate profile, SOLIDWORKS has this thing and it looks like a little A, and what this does is it allows you to change the angle of the profile. So if I say let's make that 30 degrees, SOLIDWORKS is going to come in and make that 30 degrees. So in this application, I'm going to say let's make it 270. So it's taking it and rotating it all the way around and stopping just shy of a full 360. So now with this is going to make these cross beams so it's going to be flush to my end caps that I have. Say okay to that. That looks pretty good. Okay, so hopefully this gives you guys some insight on being able to generate your weldment profiles and creating your structures for your weldments actually. And so I generally lean toward doing the practice of working with my planes and updating those to drive my sketches and my weldment profiles. So once again, if I came into my top plane and said, you know what, I don't need that to be 27, I want to make this so it's a little bit taller, so let's make it so it's 36 inches tall. Control Q, you'll see that everything updated on here for me. And you can even say, you know what, my left driven, all right, so it's at 100. Let's make it so that this is not 50 anymore. Let's make it so that this is actually going to be at 36. And once again, you'll see that this updated nicely so that it's centered about these two profiles. So hopefully you guys got some insight on this. I love working with weldments. It's especially here in the Valley, majority of everyone utilizes weldments in some capacity. This is just a simple application with utilizing wood. If you have further questions on using weldments and wondering, man, how can I adapt this to my scenario and how can I utilize this for my company, feel free to shoot us an email. Once again, my email is peter.estes@valleycad.com. Hop onto our website. It's www.valleycad.com. You can also write to us here on Twitch or also on the YouTube channel as well. Twitch is @valleycad. YouTube is also @valleycad. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this, and as we end, remember, go out and learn something new. Have a great rest of the day, guys.